Engaging the hearts and minds of Generation Y is not a simple task for organisations seeking to connect with this segment of the population. Gen Ys are a cohort of unique individuals who are more empowered in their life and in their personal and professional decisions than any generation preceding them. As McCrindle researchers Mark McCrindle points out, Gen Ys have access to more information and options than ever before.
They view things not just from a local perspective, but a national, indeed an international perspective. And they just, through this information, through their empowerment, through the options that they have, and even the influence of parents and others, they're just more informed.
The evolving lifestyle needs and changing circumstances of Gen Y offer real potential for them to become a valuable client group in the business book of a financial advisor. When it comes to communicating and engaging any generation, whether it be the veterans, the baby boomers, or generations X, Y or Z, McCrindle says it's vital to surf the wave.
There's no point in trying to change that generation to become more like the previous one that you knew. It's just the new rules to the game. So let's observe the wave, let's surf the wave, let's not complain about the wave and why it's not going in the direction that we want. And I think if we can better understand the times, we can better surf that wave, we can better meet the needs of those individuals there.
McCrindle says there are 3 factors that define any generation, these being their age and life stage, the conditions placed upon them as a generation, and the social markers that impact their coming of age. As Gen Ys are currently aged between 18 and 32 years, they will experience a range of life stages as they progress from their late teens through their 20s and into their early 30s. Gen Y is sometimes referred to as the boomerang or Peter Pan generation because of a trend towards living with their parents for longer periods, along with their penchant for delaying some rites of passage into adulthood, such as marriage and starting a family. Despite the fact that Gen Y's progression into the wealth accumulation years has been delayed until their early 30s, each life stage during this period will encompass a host of transition events that advisors can offer their services for.
Generation Y are at a different life stage to every other generation. Obviously, as they move into the marriage years and household forming years, as they move into buying property and moving into the job role, becoming wealth accumulators, they're right now moving to that key point, the key frame where they're going to need what financial advisors have to offer. So engage with them, connect, tell the story, and show the need for what advisors have to offer.
The expectations and values of Gen Ys are unlike those of preceding generations, particularly due to the development of technology during their formative years. Therefore, it's important to understand the 21st century lifestyle in order to communicate to this generation using 21st century methods. Compared to previous generations, Gen Y is the most technologically savvy, are more highly educated, have been offered additional opportunities during their schooling years, and exercise the freedom to explore multi-career options. Avril Henry says Gen Y are also the most optimistic by nature and lead far more unconventional lifestyles.
They also more informal. They've watched their parents, we the boomers, have several marriage breakups, so baby boomers are the most married and most divorced generation, which therefore means that Gen Ys have become what I describe as far more lifestyle centric.
This characteristic also trickles into Gen Y's professional lives, where they not only expect but will demand a work-life balance, with the keys to their success being to work smarter, not harder.
None of the other generations have a work-life balance, but they're also impatient. And I say, well, who made them that way? We have stimulated them with computer games and technology since they were toddlers. And while they see themselves as independent, I describe them as independently dependent on their parents.
Henry says Gen Ys have to some degree been bubble-wrapped by their parents. However, it's important to remember this group enjoyed 16 years of unprecedented economic wealth and prosperity prior to the GFC.
As a generation, they've never really known hardship, despite the GFC, because they're a generation who are not wedded to a job title or what they've studied. They will go and do anything to earn a living. Even in the GFC, they did not experience that urgency around financial security that veterans and boomers have.
This is also the case for the priority Gen Ys place on financial plans, insurance and superannuation.
And I can tell you now their attitude is, I don't have to worry about that now. That's for older people. And in the case of superannuation, even though it is their own money, the way they see it is it's not their money for a long, long time. And 30 years to a Gen Y, or 35 or 40 years is light years away, because a Gen Y only thinks in 2 to 3 year time frames.
Events and experiences, both global and social, that Gen Y has lived through during their formative years has also played a pivotal role. Gen Y were growing up during the dot-com boom and as the internet phenomenon came of age, and then were moving into their working lives just as social media took off.
We call them social markets that leave fingerprints on a generation. And so clearly Generation Y have been shaped differently because of their formative years and experiences than the previous generations.
The rise of instant communication technologies such as email, texting, instant messaging and new media formats used through websites such as YouTube and social networking sites like Facebook, MySpace and Twitter have shaped Gen Y, particularly in regard to their reputation for being somewhat peer-oriented.
So they integrate the technology into their whole lifestyle. It's not a tool they pick up and use and put back down, but something that is just built into how they think, how they operate, how they gather information.
When it comes to making a meaningful connection with Gen Y, McCrindle says there are 4 key elements to keep in mind. Advisors should keep it real, relevant, responsive and relational. Gen Ys have seen a lot of hype during their lifetime to date. They've been advertised and marketed to more than any other generation, and they know when something is inauthentic.
So if we can keep it real, if we can build that connection in a real way, almost as an advisor of trust, rather than someone pushing something on them, then I think we'll best engage.
Henry suggests for advisors to identify with Gen Y by making their interactions with them more informal.
I think you need to understand how to speak their language without being uncool or trying to be too cool. If you turn up as a financial advisor in the pinstripe suit with a white shirt and the boring tie, using language they don't understand, I can tell you now, you've got less than 2 minutes to make an impact. You don't make an impact in 2 minutes, you're gone.
Communicating to Gen Y in ways that are relevant, but also with content that's relevant, is also necessary.
There's no point in giving a scenario to a Gen Y who's in their early 20s about retirement and security and pension when they're not at that point of interest. So keep it relevant in terms of what we say and how we say it.
However, a potential challenge around keeping it relevant to Gen Ys is their universal trait of constantly questioning why and how this can impact their decision making.
They do have that shorter time frame in which they make decisions or are focused. And so we have to, if you like, communicate within that framework, within that bandwidth of interest that they have.
As Gen Ys will move through more cycles and pathways of life than any other generation to date, advisors will need to be responsive to their changing financial needs and circumstances and re-engage with these clients at each transition point.
We're going to see more churn with Generation Y than ever before. And so again, keeping tabs on them, perhaps upping those touch points, that personal communication with Gen Y is going to be key if we're going to maintain that book over the long term.
Henry listed 4 factors to also keep in mind, with the first and most important factor being to demonstrate interest in them.
Number 2, involve them in the process. So explain your products and what you have to offer, but allow them to ask questions and answer their questions without patronising them. Number 3, inspire them by showing them that what you have to offer actually is something really good. And number 4 is then explain things to them. So they want to understand what I call the who, what, when and why in a much greater way than previous generations.
Keeping it relational is vital to any advisor's connection with a client.
If we have that relationship of trust, if there's that relationship of authenticity and that relationship is there, we understand them, we connect with them, we respect them, that'll go both ways and they'll stick with us for the long term. So relational is foundational and key also.
Both generational and gender diversity are also very important to have in a workplace.
In consumer psychology, we talk about a 7-year rule, a plus or minus 7-year rule. That is that we can connect very naturally with people about 7 years older than us, about 7 years younger than us.
Therefore, it's important for an advice firm to have a mix of baby boomers, Gen X and Gen Y on the team so they can connect more naturally with both colleagues and clients of the same generation. The digital world and social networking have transformed the learning style of Gen Y and how they respond and process information they receive.
When they're looking for things that they're interested in, they pull information towards themselves through the internet and doing Google searches. When you push information towards them, they will only be interested if it's something of interest to them.
When communicating content to Gen Y, McCrindle suggests it needs to be in better sound bites or smaller, more digestible portions.
For them, it's not so much the what in terms of the content, but the how in terms of the process, how we communicate that content. They're more visual, or more kinesthetic, more hands-on in their learning than just cognitive, technical, analytical. So we have to engage in those forms of communication as well.
As Gen Ys have a short attention span, Henry recommends the power of 3 principle to deliver critical information in a concise manner.
You tell people 3 things, they can remember it. Tell people 5 things, they'll forget 2.
When it comes to reaching out to Gen Y, the use of social media, face-to-face communication and hard copy material all have their place and individual benefits when engaging this cohort. Considering Gen Y grew up during the advent of social media, the use of networking platforms is essential for any business seeking to engage this cohort. When adopting social media into a business, McCrindle recommends the key is to use the concept correctly.
It is about being part of the conversation, communicating through them and with them, not just at them. It's true social media. It's a community of discussion rather than just providing more content, dumping it on them.
Despite its popularity, Henry says social media will not replace traditional face-to-face communication with Gen Y. In fact, results from a recent survey she conducted indicated face-to-face interaction ranked as their top communication preference.
Their communication preference and their preference of how to learn, number 1, was still face-to-face. And that online learning and online tools for communicating, while it's in their top 3, it's number 3, not number 1.
There's still a place for hard copy marketing material too. It's just a matter of how it's designed.
Design it with them, communicate it through them, get them on board and involved in the very process of the delivery of that content. They are more empowered. They know their generation better than we do. So let's engage them in that.
To further bridge any generational gaps that may exist when it comes to Gen Y, Henry says advisors should consider investing some time and money into training and development.
There are 3 things you need to learn. 1 is you need to learn your own communication style and how to listen. Because there are 4 communication styles, 2 of which people listen, 2 of which people don't listen, they tell. Secondly, you need to understand how to engage, motivate and manage Gen Ys as clients and as employees. And last but not least, it's also about learning how to listen actively and reflectively, because most people hear things but don't listen.